If you're here with us, welcome. And this is our first attempt at putting together a podcast. And I think we should start in the beginning. Not the beginning, but, winter's night.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's just so much to talk about for Winter's Night. Like everything from just how the intro with the wind is so well done, right? Like there's so much information conveyed so seamlessly from one topic to the next that just feels natural. Right? Like, for example, you have the scene of the wind going through the mountains, going through the trees, and it ends up just pushing Rand around, right? Like his cloak is flowing. It like gets caught on his arrows, and then like from there, it gives you this transition to Tam just walking with the wind around him. He's not like bothered by it at all, which then just leads to the description of what he looks like, right? Saying that he's like a head shorter than Rand, and he has brown hair and brown eyes, and that leads to the description of Rand's mother, right? And that how Rand takes after her and his description, right? It all just flows so great, and also gives you hints of who Rand is and why he looks so different. And it like gives you this excuse right before the wind flows to the Madral, right? Like the fade, and it doesn't touch it.
Yeah, yeah. And this is the first time that we were all introduced to the wind,
Yeah,
right? Which
right.
is when we were reading it for the first time. I don't know if you remember reading it for the first time. Um, it was confusing a bit
Yeah,
and inconsequential, right? It was just a thing. But as with most things with the Wheel of Time, the rereads, when after you read it the first time and you come back and you read it again, that wind is like almost a character within the books. And
oh
so
yeah, for
coming
sure.
back to that first book and reading that first entry passage, the wind really gets me, and obviously it gets you as well.
Yeah, and obviously it got Robert Jordan as well, because and his wife Harriet, because they even talked about how um, he used the wind to breathe life into his work, because there's some specific word that in Jewish means wind and to breathe. And so he said that like the wind was him breathing life into his book and into its series,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, that. Yeah. It's. Yeah. I don't know. Like it gets the feels, all the feels with the wind. Um. And like I don't. I think we could just talk forever about this first entry scene and
Hmm.
like the just the first moments of the book, right? Like it really um shows us like the not even just like the individual characters, but um, it's like a really well done exposition where it's not going through and like listing all the things about these characters and the two rivers.
Hmm.
It does that a little bit, but it's also introducing the the character of the two rivers with
Yeah.
Tam bringing in apple cider and apple brandy,
Hmm.
um, and they're on this rocky road, the quarry road, right?
Yeah.
And it's it's a tough land, right? And but
Yeah.
we're still really into this, like a little bit of the hobbits, right? I would say there's some hobbits in there
Yeah.
with the food that's being introduced with the cider, apple
Hmm.
brandy, and they're seemingly risking life and limb to deliver.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that. Yeah, like it's like hobbits, but a large sense of just standard day-to-day living with the chance of danger, right? Of bears, of wolves.
And they could have stayed home, but then they wouldn't deliver their top-notch cider and apple brandy, which are so important that they have to risk these dangers to deliver.
Yeah, and Tam gave his word, right?
Yeah, yeah, and that gives us so much about who Tam is. Um, yeah, it's really great. Um, so I think we could spend probably several hours just on this initial introductory to the road. But I want to kind of move on to like some of the other characters. Um, there's so much well done exposition in this entry, right?
Yeah.
And it's so dense. You
Oh yeah.
said saying this earlier. It is so dense with
No,
how
dense.
much is really in the first few chapters of the first book.
Yeah.
Uh, I don't
Like
think
the
it. Go ahead.
no, yeah, I was just gonna say like the introduction of all of the guides, right? Like the introduction of Moraine, of Tom, of I wouldn't say introduction of Lan, because he doesn't say anything, but uh,
I think
that
that's a introduction of Lan. I think that's fairly
yeah, you're right.
representative.
Yeah, um, and of Pod and Fane too, right? Like
Mm.
the boys when they first really meet Moraine, it's because they feel something watching them, and they turn around and there's a raven, right?
Well, Rand feels uh, goosebumps.
Yeah, yeah, good point, right?
I don't know let's just dig into that moment for a little bit. Um, yeah, like I don't know that in Robert Jordan's writing he had already planned out and explicitly said men who can channel
Yeah,
can detect a woman channeling via goosebumps. Um,
very true.
I don't like maybe you did, but I think it was more like just that, like felt someone watching them, and that's the feeling, right? Um, and then maybe later he connected the dots. I think he did a lot of that, but on the reread,
Yeah,
it's everywhere. You can kind of pick that out and be like, yeah, maybe right there. And there's strong um, indicators that Moraine was channeling.
yeah, for sure.
And there are
Especially with
little
the
hints
coins.
everywhere.
Yeah, yeah, like when she gives them the large silver coins, right? But they gave like Ewan a small like silver penny, and both Matt and Rand were like, I don't think I'm supposed to spend this. And Maureen specifically says, like, we have a bond now
Mm-hmm.
between us. It's like, oh, was that like a little bit of minor compulsion?
Yeah, like it definitely seems like that, right?
Right?
Um,
Which is a
and
little
there's
terrifying.
yeah, like in the um, prequel, right?
Hmm.
They do talk about how the Blue Aja has these kind of uh, almost compulsion edge weaves
Yeah,
that are the secret to the Blue Aja, and yeah, they're not technically compulsion, but ooh, yeah, they
yeah,
definitely are on that edge
yeah,
for
they walk the
sure.
line for sure.
And we do
Yeah, and
know Moraine, not to talk about the New Spring too much. Um, maybe save that for another one, but she does use that rather freely in that book in some instances.
yeah, for sure. And just to move off from there really quick, because we're talking about the introductions, right? Like they have that introduction. Moraine specifically calls out ravens as animals of the shadow, right? And then what's fabulous in my mind is just a little bit later when they're talking to Tom, and Tom finds out that Podden Fane is there in the town. He makes a joke that he always thought he was a little bit more raven than man. And it's like, oh man, it's such good foretelling, if you will.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. There's a lot of what amounts to be like exposition, but it's not. it's well done in that it sounds natural, right? It's not this narrator sitting there telling you everything. It's exposition done in a natural conversation. Like it's normal for these characters to be having these conversations. Master Bowie, the Thatcher, he's really a big tool, I think, for Robert Jordan to do these expositions where he's the guy that's saying everything out loud, right? He's saying the quiet part out loud.
Yeah.
And everyone's like, shut up.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, I'm not wrong. It's like, well, no, you're not, but shh, right? But he's a great tool for us.
Yeah, for sure.
Like there were some smaller kind of hints about, the weather being rough, right? When Tam and Rand were walking along the quarry road. But then when Podden Fane rolls into town, he crosses the wagon bridge and stops in front of the inn, and he's telling everything, right? And he's talking about the dragon. And people are calling out false dragon, and Senbui is it a false dragon? He's saying the quiet part out loud. Is it a false dragon? What? And he's explaining where are the crops that should be knee high by now. And that's a big deal, for farming. If you're expecting crops to be like well on their way of growth, not just planted, but healthy and knee high, like that's a really, really big deal. Like, yeah, they're seriously facing starvation at that point, and we wouldn't necessarily know that if without that exposition. Senbui's saying the quiet part out loud, and everyone's like, "Shut up."
Yeah, but and to go along with that, the reverse of this character that is just kind of shouting everything that people really need to know and understand about the world, right? Is the really subtle interactions that, at least for me, I didn't catch. Like when Tom and Moraine first meet, like Moraine just straight up threatens him, saying that it's dangerous for people to be traveling alone. And Tom is like, well, I'll make sure that my stories don't displease you. It's fantastic, just like undertones of threat that, unless you know these two characters, it's really easy to just miss as like a simple conversation, right?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. You could, that kind of interaction of, it's dangerous on the road. You're traveling alone. We just heard of all this about, two full-grown men that were armed, being all wary on the quarry road just from their farm, little ways down the dirt road. And this guy's traveling around. Like, yeah, it seems like a very natural conversation for them to be having.
Yeah.
But like nearly everything that is in this book, especially I think the Eye of the World, there's undertones and a
Yeah.
lot of things that aren't said. There's far more conversation being had um, in the parts that aren't said out loud, but you don't pick
Yeah.
it up until you reread it, and maybe not even your first reread. It maybe takes you 3, 4, 5, 10
Yeah.
rereads to
Absolutely.
catch. Like every time you reread it, there's new little things in there that you pick up.
Yeah. And on that exact route, um, Robert Jordan obviously speaks through Moraine when at one point the characters are literally asking Moraine, like, what aren't you telling me? And she goes, like, I don't have time to explain everything to you. If I did, like, we'd be here forever. I have so much knowledge to impart for you, but we need to move. Like, we need to keep going. And I feel like that's Robert Jordan really just telling the reader, like, I
Yeah.
can't
Oh
sit
yeah.
here
That's so
and
good.
explain everything. Yeah. Like, I can't explain every decision to you. Like, I need to get this story moving. And part of that is just living with all these things you don't know, right? And like the very intro of Louis Theron is like a perfect example of that, right? Of just like this super confusing intro that no one really understood the first time through, but really conveyed so much information, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. And to kind of touch on that of like this world is so big and
Mm-hmm.
so detailed. Um, we have to kind of go back and pay a little bit of homage to, you know, the Tolkien
Oh
books,
yeah,
right?
absolutely.
That this is kind of where all of this is originating from. Um, is the Tolkien Lord of the Rings world
Mm-hmm.
is kind of it's kind of set in that fantasy space that was built by Tolkien. Um, and I kind of feel like um, he's doing something very similar to what he did with the Conan series, right? Is he wrote books in the Conan universe, the Conan world,
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
and a lot of you can really see the influence of his time in the Conan world in the Wheel of Time, and um, and a lot of those same concepts, like the wheel itself, I think was really born from his time in that Conan universe. Um,
yeah.
and
I
I
could.
may be wrong about that, and I'm willing to be wrong about that, but there is a lot about that. So the Conan, I don't know if you've read the original Conan stories at all.
I've read one of his. Well, I've read Robert Jordan's Conan book, at least one of them, along with his Warriors of the Altai.
Mm,
Very Conan-esque, right?
yeah. So no, the original Conans, um, they were a magazine, right? Um, Stories that were published in the Conan articles, I'll call them, in these magazines by Robert E. Howard.
Mhm.
Um, and so it was always this. I absolutely love them. I definitely recommend reading them. They're all short stories, and they're all short stories about this young man named Conan, who is the barbarian, right? And what that
Yeah,
means is different in each
yeah,
of his stories. In some of his stories, Conan is this very dexterous um young man who scales a tower quickly and to rob the wealthy owner of this tower in the top, and of course runs into some beautiful maiden and things like that, right? And then in the next story, they'll start from scratch, and it'll be this very large, hulking, strength barbarian that wears
Yeah.
a loincloth, right?
Yeah.
So this Conan character is always a very different person with the same name of Conan. And there's always a hero doing hero things. Those are the original Conans.
Yeah.
So not to, we'll leave the Conan stuff behind, but there's a lot there that I think heavily influenced Robert Jordan's creation of the Wheel of Time. And they're great.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally agreed. Yeah, because it's all about this cycle of rebirth, right? Like that's the whole point of the Wheel of Time, is these characters that are reborn and live different lives and do hero things, right? Which is very appropriate. And it makes sense with all of his knowledge and his clear research of different religions and ancient peoples. And, he spent quite a lot of time in Southeast Asia, too, right? So it makes sense for all of these influences to soak in.
Yeah. So the Lord of the Rings influence is very strong, right? And that, I believe, you may agree with me on this, and that it was intentional.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There's so many scenes that just reflect Lord of the Rings. Like, just feel exactly the same. If you read the first Wheel of Time book and you read the first Lord of the Rings book, you'll be just blown away by how many things are just mirroring each other, really.
Yeah, and it's not like you can't write a book in fantasy without paying homage to this giant, is Tolkien, who took all of these European myths, right, and
Yeah.
created a brand new world from them. And that's kind of my Conan comment, is he wrote these Conan books exploring the Conan universe.
Yeah.
And I feel like the Wheel of Time is almost like he was writing exploring the Lord of the Rings universe, and expanding on it, and
Yeah.
and then making it his own. But
Yeah,
it
I think
starts in the beginning.
Yeah. Well, I think this is a big deviation, but Lord of the Rings being the influence, right? Like Lord of the Rings is always talking about all these great like accomplishments and talents and just this fantastic world and civilization that is slowly crumbling, right? And that's essentially the theme that at least I've gotten from Lord of the Rings. And I feel like Robert Jordan may have talked on this. My memory doesn't serve me well in this moment, but I think what I love about Wheel of Time is it's kind of got this circular aspect to that idea, right? Of like, there's a really great time where all these cool things were there. It's crumbling, but like, since like the time is a wheel, like people are starting to discover again, like people are starting to show new talents, and like it's moving again towards that progressive time, right? It's like it's not like these amazing legends are forever gone, right?
Yeah,
Which is a fun aspect.
yeah, which is I do agree that's different than how Lord of the Rings portrayed that world. In that Lord of the Rings was there was a time of the gods, right?
Yep. Yeah.
And then it progressed towards what is our modern time. And while there's a little bit of that, flavor in the Wheel of Time. It is very different.
Oh yeah, so
Um,
different.
yeah, and I think one of the really cool things about the big differences that I really like is the Lord of the Rings was all about essentially the gods, right? That
Yeah.
was the driving factor, the driving force
Hmm.
through everything, right? Was the gods greater than men? People were born to be essentially better than other people in
Yeah.
the Lord of the Rings. And they were destined to that no matter what. And obviously, there's a lot of that reflection within um, the Wheel of Time, but it is not about the gods.
Yeah.
It is not about the higher power. Yes, it's there, right? But it's very abstract.
Yeah.
And it's about the actions of us and what we choose and decide to do. Um, I don't want to dig too much into that because
Yeah.
that leads to a
I
lot of
think.
other conversations about what happened in other events within the Wheel of Time. So other theories, which we can save for later. But there's some pretty big uh, delineations, I think, right there between the Lord of the Rings and the Wheel of Time in that it's about the humans and how the humans are making decisions and working together or working against each other um, to weave the pattern.
Yeah. And I think along with that, the the main enemy in Lord of the Rings doesn't feel too often like it's man, right? Like that we're creating this own environment for
Yeah, it's
ourselves.
not up to us.
Yeah, it's not up to us. Um, but yeah, moving on. For the similarities and differences, right? Like you have Moraine, you have Lan, right? And you in Lord of the Rings, you have Gandalf and you have Aragorn,
Yeah.
right? I think one of the key differences, though, is that you almost always have Moraine, right? Until Shadar Logoth, where people get split up, and at that point, you have to find new guides, right? And those new guides become either Elias or Tom, right? Um, but I feel like one of the key aspects of Eye of the World that makes it so great is you're always from this point of view of a character who doesn't understand what the fuck is going on, right? Like you never understand why things are happening and where you even are in the world.
Right. Yeah,
And
the world is not this known thing. You're
mhm,
stumbling through it as a you know country bumpkin with straw in their hair.
yeah, yeah, exactly, right. And even though these characters always have people that are uh, so capable, right? Like you'd say Elias is beyond capable, right? Tom is just a, a legend, right? And obviously, putting aside Moraine and Lan, there, like they have these master class people of just living, right? And the characters are still constantly almost dying.
Oh yeah. Yeah, like they're epic level characters that can and they're barely surviving. Um
Yeah,
yeah, which is wild to think about. Um like how did these three boys that have nothing to like no skills, nothing. Like they've just got luck essentially,
yeah,
and these other people uh, looking out for them. Like
yeah,
there's a lot to jump into there, but Yeah. Wow. Like it's they Lan, Moraine, Tom, like they're escaping and managing through these by the skin of their teeth.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is wild.
Yeah, and
Um,
it's such a great literary tool too, right? Like they're not only just the guides of the characters, they're the guides of the readers, which is fantastic.
yeah, yeah. Um, so back to Winter's Night. Um, by the way, I'm drinking some warm cider in honor of Tam's cider and the cider that Matt and Rand had when they were unloading the wagon, taking things down into the cellar, um, eating some honey cakes and whatnot. Um, but yeah, like Winter's Night, so much happened.
Yeah.
Um, I feel like the events of just what happened at Rand's house warrants a dedicated discussion all by itself.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Um, there's just so much in there. Um,
Let alone that happens off screen, right?
oh yeah, yeah. There, and I think that's one of my favorite parts about these entry scenes is it's introducing and uh, like this I don't even know how to say it. Like we've got a
Yeah.
world of people who are active, busy doing things,
Yeah.
and have no concern for you. Like,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
like we walk by these people, right?
Mhm.
Um, as Rand and Tam are coming in to deliver their cider and their apple brandy about, and we're just like walking past all of these busy things that are happening.
Yeah.
Um, and then Podon Fane rolls into town, and hey, there's Perrin,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
so like Perrin's been busy doing all kinds of stuff, and we just run into him, and he just um, they've got other things that they need to be doing. They're not
Yeah.
there
It
for your
feels so
story.
real. Yeah.
Yeah,
It feels so real. Because like, yeah, they're not just NPCs, right? That like show up when you're there, right? Like there's other stuff that's going on. Like there's always other things happening, whether or not you're experiencing it.
yeah, which that is the magic. That
Yeah.
really is the magic of the Wheel of Time.
Yeah. And, there's that phrase, if you can't believe your horses, how are you going to believe the dragons, right? Um, and and there's always just enough details that it feels so real, right? Like other things are happening, like the wind is blowing your clothes and now it's getting caught on your arrows, or your horse is just mad at you for you catching yourself using their reins, right? And like it's just the little details that really make the story.
Oh yeah, yeah. So down in that cellar, when they're delivering their brandy, right?
Hmm.
They uh, they hear that there's a strangers in town.
Oh yeah.
The younger boy comes down and is like, "Hey, there's strangers in town." And what really like jumped out to me was that you would think as the reader generally like you're like, oh, you're talking about the the Gleeman, right? Because they had already known about
Yeah.
the Gleeman, right? But they're so worried and scared
Yeah.
by that fade, that this other boy says, "Hey, they're strangers." That they both, Rand and Matt, freak out, and
Yeah.
and it really paints a picture that that it wasn't just like this weird silly thing, and now they're on to like this warm, comfortable, because they're surrounded by all this warm, comfortable scene, right? The cider, the honey cakes, the raising of the pole, all this nice, sweet, comfortable, safe things. But then they are one mention of the stranger, which you'd assume they would think about the Gleeman, because they were just talking about that. They immediately jump to the Black Rider.
Yeah.
And they're just so scared and jump on his, and he even says in that little bit of like, normally they would have given short shrift. There's enough years separating them. But because of this Black Rider that they saw, and they were so scared that's what they jumped to.
Yeah. Which again is really another Lord of the Rings parallel, right? Of a Black Rider asking around, trying to find out about essentially you, right? Yeah. and really giving the first motivation to get out of Dodge, right? Another key factor there from all these conversations of Winternight is how isolated they are from the rest of the world. Right?
Oh yeah.
Like it's such a key factor for their protection, for being able to grow up not knowing anything too, right? Like it helps the reader even as well.
Yeah. Yeah, they're so isolated there. And that plays into like the reader stepping into this unknown world and not knowing anything about the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Except, the reader does know about things like apple cider and like being awkward with girls, obviously. Yeah, you're right. It does make you feel really safe, and then brings in this Black Rider, and you have everything that happens with Rand and Tam at home, right?
Right. Yeah. Maybe next time we will chat about what happens when they leave, because they walk. I always found it kind of surprising that they took so much effort and made so much risk to get into town, and then they went home.
Yeah, and that is kind of described by the Black Rider, right? Like Tam explicitly says, there could be this guy skulking about, stealing people's things, and that's why we're going home, right? Like we can't leave this farm for this random rider to just go through our stuff, because we just don't have a lot really to lose as well, right?
Yeah. I was like always kind of shocked by that, of like, oh, they seem to have gone on this perilous journey, and now they're doing it again the same day. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then they're going to do it again tomorrow.
Yeah. And it really shows the change in mannerisms of everybody, right? Because like it's even talked about that they've never locked their door before. Why are they doing it tonight, right? Let alone Tam feeling uncomfortable enough to pull out his sword.
Oh yeah, so let's bring that up next time, and let's just dig into just the events of Winter's Night at home.
Yeah.
There is so much to dig into there. All right.
Yeah.
It's been fun.
Yeah.
I love having these conversations. If you're listening to this, thank you so much for joining and having some good times with the Wheel of Time.